I went to dinner with friends and saw my wife and her boss at the next table, smiling together in a way she hadn't smiled at me in years, maybe never smiled at me like that, and in that moment, as my vision went black and the sound around me became a distant hum, I understood everything. The only thing left for me to do now was confront them, and I did. I walked over to their table, breathing hard, my heart bleeding inside, and when she saw me, her smile disappeared as if it had never been there. The words came out of my mouth like a sentence, "It's over between us." I turned my back and walked away, but I left behind the part of me that believed in unconditional love. For months she tried to pretend it hadn't happened, then she tried to blame me, and finally she begged for forgiveness. But when she finally realized that she had lost the true love of her life, I was already determined to move on without her. That's when she asked for a second chance, but it was too late. And it was at that moment that I discovered what it means to see someone's soul implode in the face of their own mistakes. People think the worst part of betrayal is the moment it happens, but it doesn't. The worst part is what comes after. The uncomfortable silence in the rooms that once held laughter. The way the furniture remains in the same place, but seems cold, immobile, indifferent to the pain that pulses in the air. The cruelest part of betrayal is what it takes away from you, your self-esteem, your faith in people, your peace. Betrayal doesn't kill you all at once, it suffocates you little by little. I remember how I prepared myself that day, a simple dinner with old friends, a light evening that I thought would be ordinary. I left the house with a loving message sent to her, telling her that I loved her. And little did I know that she was already sitting at another table, in another world, far from me, even though she was just a few meters away. That scene destroyed me. Seeing the two of them together, seeing how she touched his arm intimately, how her eyes sought him as if he were the most interesting thing in the universe. I became invisible to her. I know many would say I should have made a scene, thrown everything in her face right there, attacked her. But I just stood there, watching. She didn't see me right away. And when she did, her expression broke into 1,000 pieces. Her smile died. Her eyes widened, and the boss tried to hide it, taking his hand off hers like a teenager caught by his parents. But that was it. I walked up to them, looked straight at her, and without raising my voice, I just said, "It's over." I didn't cry, I didn't scream. My pain was too great to fit into small gestures. And then I left. I left like someone who is carrying their own funeral inside. There was no goodbye, no explanation. She followed me with her eyes, but she didn't have the courage to follow. The messages started 2 days later. "We need to talk." It wasn't what it seems. It was a mistake. And then came the audios. The sobs. The confessions. The cheap excuses, as if her fragility was reason enough to break everything we had built together. When she saw that I wasn't responding, she tried to come to my house, but I wasn't there anymore. I was rebuilding who I was. Really? That broke me. I fell into a hole that I wouldn't wish on anyone. I slept little, ate poorly, looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize who I saw. Do you know what was worse? It wasn't just her that I lost. It was the confidence I had in my own ability to be loved. I felt like garbage. But time, oh, time has a silent and powerful way of putting things back in place. I started therapy, rekindled old friendships that she had driven away from me. I started playing the guitar again, something she said was a waste of time. And then, as if I had never expected anything, I met someone. Someone who didn't demand anything from me, just looked at me as if I was enough. For the first time in years, I didn't feel pressured, diminished, compared. I was just me, and that was enough. It wasn't overwhelming passion, it was peace. And when my ex found out, it was as if her world fell apart. She came after me, crying, saying she had made a mistake, that she regretted it, that it had been a moment of weakness, that the guy was just an escape, that he meant nothing. "It was just one night, but you are my life," she said. And I looked at her like someone observing a stranger. The strangest thing is that I didn't feel angry. I no longer felt anything. And that was what destroyed her. Because while she was begging to come back, I had found something she never valued, my own emotional freedom. But the final blow was yet to come. She went back to live with her parents. I know because the town is small, and everyone knows everything. But contrary to what many people would think, her parents didn't kick her out, they didn't humiliate her. On the contrary, they welcomed her, but with the painful silence of someone who is disappointed. Her father wouldn't look her in the eye during breakfast. Her mother cried softly when she thought no one was watching. You destroyed a good man. An entire marriage for a whim. And why? I heard her mother ask the other day. And she didn't know how to answer. Because deep down, not even she understood what she had done. All she knew was that she wanted to go back, but it was too late. I was no longer available. And the man who had once loved her with body and soul was now a stranger with a different smile, with another woman by his side. The irony is that she didn't just lose her husband. She lost the clean mirror in which she saw herself every day. Today, even surrounded by people, she feels the emptiness of the love she threw away. And this absence, is the true punishment. Because the forgiveness she wanted, the embrace she sought, the chance she hoped for, never came. But what she doesn't know yet, is what happened the day she saw me holding hands with my new partner, laughing in front of the old bakery where she and I bought croissants on Sundays. She looked at me, waited for me to see her, and I saw her. And in that brief moment, she took a step towards me. But she was stopped. And what happened in that moment, in that second when everything could have changed again, is something that will never leave her mind. And that's where everything changes. But did she get what she deserved? Had I truly found new love, or just another way to hide my scars? And what did she say to her parents that night, when she came home in tears after seeing me from afar with another woman? What happened next, no one expected. Welcome to our channel. Here, we never romanticize or support any type of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they carry hard truths, because our goal is to show how betrayal has the power to destroy lives, families, and souls. Brace yourself. What follows is an intense, realistic and deeply shocking story. Happy listening. During the first few years, everyone said they were the kind of couple that inspired others. David was a civil engineer, detail-oriented and dedicated, the kind of man who woke up early, made coffee for both of them and left small notes on the table, with simple but tender words. Sophia, a literature teacher at a high school, had a rare sensitivity. She knew how to listen, she knew how to observe, and she cared about the details that almost no one noticed. Together, they built a life without great luxuries, but with deep meanings. Nights of old movies, modest trips with shared notebooks, Sunday mornings with pancakes and unhurried conversations. Nothing seemed to be missing. Whoever saw them, saw stability, complicity and a kind of affection that permeated the most common routines. They were not the couple on social media, they did not have staged photos or exaggerated public statements, but you only had to be around them for a few minutes to feel that there was something real there. The house they lived in smelled of wood and coffee. It was small but bright, with large windows and a bookshelf that held her books and his projects. David, despite working with calculations and structures, had an introspective side that was enchanted by Sophia's universe. He admired her deeply, not only for her intelligence, but for the way she made the people around her feel seen. Sophia, in turn, considered him her safe haven. He was the kind of man who would get her car running on a cold day, who would fix things without her asking, who could tell she was tired before she even complained. On their 6th wedding anniversary, David prepared a surprise. He planted a tree in the backyard and put up a sign with the phrase, "Our future grows here." Sophia cried that day, and he hugged her without saying anything, as he always did when words were not enough. Their routine was peaceful, but there was a certain subtle distance forming over the years. Nothing to cause alarm, just the feeling that time was passing a little faster than it should have allowed. David was quieter, involved with deadlines and long projects, and Sophia always seemed tired, coming home from class with her head full of names, students' problems, and endless meetings. They still loved each other, but the space between them was no longer the same. The sofa that had been so cramped before now seemed too big. There were still kisses, but more hurriedly. There were still words of affection, but they were increasingly diluted in everyday life. They both felt it, but neither of them knew how to name that growing emptiness, nor how to rescue what seemed to be slowly slipping through their fingers. Sophia also started working as a literary project coordinator at a foundation in the city. It was a new position, a challenge that excited her. She got involved in workshops, events, lectures, met new authors and had to deal with people from different backgrounds. This world made her feel alive, valued and challenged. David, although proud of his wife's achievements, noticed that she arrived home later, more distracted, with her mind elsewhere. When he asked her how her day had been, her answers came quickly and generically. And he, not knowing how to get her to come back, kept quiet. He spent more time in his small office at home, adjusting projects and planning renovations that might never happen. Their relationship began to be sustained by small attempts to keep up appearances. Dinners on Saturdays, visits to her parents, movies that she fell asleep before the end. Sophia sometimes felt a strange loneliness even when lying next to her husband. David, in turn, looked at her with a confused feeling. It wasn't anger, it wasn't lack of love, it was a mixture of concern and helplessness. He still loved her, but he didn't know how to reach her anymore. On one of those silent days, when Sophia rushed past him wearing a new dress and wearing a different perfume, saying she had a last-minute meeting, David simply responded with, "Good luck," and went back to sorting through papers he didn't feel like organizing. It was as if their lives had entered a kind of suspension, where nothing exploded, but everything slowly weakened. There were still good times. Like the mornings when David would make coffee and she would appear in the kitchen barefoot, with her hair messy, saying she loved the smell of the house. Or when, in the middle of the night, he would wake up and find her hugging him, even though he wouldn't remember the next day. Small signs that there was still love, even if it was covered by layers of tiredness, routine and disconnection. Sophia, inside, lived a conflict that she couldn't verbalize. She felt like she was at a point in her life where she had to choose between keeping what she already knew or exploring what was disturbing her. She couldn't explain why certain looks from outside shook her so much, nor why some conversations with strangers made her feel more alive than the long silences with David. Sophia's parents had always admired their son-in-law. They considered David an honest man, with a strong character, someone who truly loved his daughter and treated her with respect. They often heard Sophia speak fondly of him, especially in the early years of their marriage. They liked the way he took care of her, how he always remembered dates, and made a point of being present at small family celebrations. For them, the couple was the example of what was expected of a modern and balanced marriage. Even when they noticed that Sophia seemed a little more distant during visits, they attributed it to the tiredness of the routine, the new challenges at work, and the common phase of long-term relationships. They never suspected anything, especially because, in fact, nothing was clear yet, just internal concerns that not even Sophia fully understood. David, on the other hand, began to realize how much he was withdrawing. He found himself rethinking everything, his choices, his attitude as a husband, his emotional absence in the last few months. He wondered if he had failed to show her how important she was. He tried to remember when was the last time he had made her laugh for real. He bought her flowers a few times, tried to resume some old habits, like cooking together on Fridays or surprising her with notes like in the beginning. But Sophia was always in a hurry, or with her mind elsewhere. She thanked him, smiled, but soon went back to her cell phone, her spreadsheets, her commitments. It was as if there were two versions of her, the sweet, easygoing woman he had married, and this new woman who seemed to carry the weight of something he didn't know. Still, he insisted. Because for David, marriage was more than just good times. It was about commitment, about trying even when the other person seemed distant. He talked to an older friend, who told him that long-term relationships require renewing promises every day. That sometimes love doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. David believed that. But deep down, he already felt that something was off. It wasn't just the lack of longer kisses or knowing looks. It was the way Sophia disconnected when they talked about the future. When he mentioned children, trips, plans, she would look away, change the subject. Sometimes she would say it was too early to think about that, even after 8 years together. This hurt him more than she would ever know. One night, while she slept next to him, David lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He thought about how everything seemed to have changed without warning. There had been no specific fight, no overt breakup. Just a subtle drift apart, as if one of them was, little by little, silently leaving. He wished it was just a phase, something they could overcome through conversation, through presence. And he decided he would do something special to remember the good times. He arranged a dinner with old friends, hoping that light, familiar atmosphere could rekindle something. Sophia accepted the invitation, even though she seemed preoccupied with work commitments. She said she would make an effort. And he believed her. At that dinner, while he was arranging the last details and exchanging messages with his friends, David allowed himself to feel hope. He thought that perhaps that night could be the beginning of a new cycle. He didn't know that, in a few hours, something would break inside him in an irreversible way. What he would see that night would change not only his perception of Sophia, but of himself, of love, of everything he believed to be solid. But until that moment, he still believed. He still had faith that a love built with dedication was strong enough to withstand any shock. And she, even lost in her own conflicts, also kept good memories. They both still carried within themselves the traits of the couple they had been, but they were about to discover that there are silences that scream, and there are gestures that cannot be undone. The invitation to dinner with old friends was met with a mixture of surprise and discomfort on Sophia's part. She hesitated, took a while to respond, said that she might have a last-minute event at the foundation, but that she would try to attend. David, even noticing her indecision, chose to ignore it. He wanted to believe that she was just overwhelmed. He took care of everything himself. He confirmed the reservation at the restaurant they usually went to on their anniversary, called his friends, organized the details, chose a special outfit. That day, he woke up with a discreet but sincere enthusiasm. He prepared breakfast for both of them, left a note on the mirror wishing them a good day and saying how much he was looking forward to the evening. There was no response. Sophia left in a hurry, her eyes glued to her cell phone screen, mumbling that the day would be full. Her lack of reaction hurt him, but he swallowed hard, determined to make that evening a new beginning. The restaurant was one of those with low lighting, a cozy atmosphere, candles on the tables and soft, almost imperceptible background music. David arrived early, wanting to guarantee a good table, a good place, a good time. While he waited for his friends and Sophia, he slowly sipped a glass of white wine and mentally reviewed all the good times they had spent together in that same place years ago. He still believed that there was something to save. His friends arrived excited, bringing laughter, memories, questions about life, children, work. Time seemed kind as they talked about the past, and for a moment he allowed himself to relax. Until his cell phone vibrated. A short message, "I'm here now. I'm at a table near the entrance. I had to come to take care of something first." At first, he didn't understand. He looked around, trying to decipher where she was sitting. When he finally saw her, his heart stopped for a second. Sophia was at a table next to it, near the entrance, exactly as she had written. But she wasn't alone. She was with a middle-aged man, well-dressed, with a confident posture and a smile that was too controlled. She was laughing. She was laughing in a way he hadn't seen in months. The kind of laughter that wasn't just about what the other person was saying, but about who the other person was. An intimate, free laugh that said more than any words could. The man touched her arm naturally, and she didn't pull away. His hand rested on hers with a fluidity that wouldn't befit two coworkers. Sophia seemed light, almost like another person. And David stood still. Inside, a part of him was melting into silence. The sounds around him became muffled. He could no longer hear his friends' laughter, nor the silverware clanging against the plates, nor the background music. Only that deafening silence that comes when everything you believed in begins to crumble without warning. He looked at her once more, hoping, perhaps, that she would notice him, that she would explain with her eyes, that she would say there had been some misunderstanding. But she only laughed, leaning forward, as if sharing secrets. He stood up, crossed the room unhurriedly, without visible anger, just with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He stopped in front of their table. She saw him, froze. The laughter evaporated from her face. The man shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. Sophia tried to smile, but it was too late. David looked at her with eyes she no longer recognized. He said only one sentence, low, firm, definitive, "It's over between us." He didn't wait for an answer. He didn't want to hear any excuses. He turned his back and left, leaving behind the smell of wine, the sound of glasses clinking, the curious looks of strangers, and a woman sitting across from a man who no longer meant anything. At that moment, as he walked out, he felt that something inside him had broken forever. But he didn't cry. The pain was too great to contain in tears. That night, he drove aimlessly. He passed by the streets they used to frequent together, by the squares where they walked hand in hand, by the bookstores where she would get lost for hours. Everything was now just the setting for a story he no longer recognized. He remembered a night, months before, when she had said she was too exhausted to talk, that she had fallen asleep on the couch in the foundation office after a meeting that had gone on longer than expected. He believed her. Because he always believed. Because he never imagined he would have to doubt someone he trusted with his eyes closed. The messages started the very next day. At first they were simple, trying to justify, deny. Then they became longer, full of regret. She said she didn't know what she was doing, that it was just a moment of weakness, that she still loved him, that none of it meant anything. But David had seen enough. The image of her smiling with another man was etched in his mind like a tattoo made with a hot iron. There was no way to erase it. And more than the act itself, it hurt to realize that she was no longer his long before that night. The betrayal didn't start there. That night was just the materialization of an absence he had been feeling for a long time. The following days were a blur of silence, painful decisions, interrupted conversations, and a cold rage that grew inside. Sophia insisted, called, sent crying messages, asked to meet. She said that everything had happened in a confusing way, that she was going through a difficult time, that she had lost her way. David listened, but didn't respond. He knew that if he opened any gap, he ran the risk of sinking back into that blind attempt to rescue what no longer existed. He tried to keep his mind busy, his heart cool, his breathing steady. But inside, everything was burning. Sophia began to get more intense. She went to his work, tried to talk to his friends, wrote letters. One day, he came home and found an envelope under the door. It was a long, handwritten letter, saying that nothing had been planned, that the other man was just someone who appeared in a moment of fragility, that she never wanted to hurt him, that she still dreamed of their future together, of children, of travel, of the life they promised to build. David read it all. Not moved, but with a kind of pity. Not for her, but for himself, for having believed so much. Meanwhile, Sophia was starting to fall apart inside. Not with the same noise he had made when he fell, but silently, slowly, like someone who is slowly losing ground. He tried to get back to his routine, but everything hurt. The places, the smells, the habits. He started to avoid his parents, who noticed the change. His mother asked cautiously, his father watched her with eyes full of contained disappointment. She said everything was fine, that it was just tiredness. But no one believed her. One night, during dinner, her mother stared at her and asked if she had done anything she regretted. Sophia cried for the first time. She didn't answer. She just got up from the table and locked herself in her room like an embarrassed teenager. The house they had lived in, once full of small signs of affection, was now just an empty place. David left. He took a few things with him. He left behind furniture, memories, photos. The pain was so great that any object could have turned into a blade. He began to sleep in another place, small, unadorned, but silent. A place where he could relearn how to exist without her. And it was in this new silence, in this forced new beginning, that something inside him began to reorganize itself. There was no rush, there were no plans. Only the need to move on. But while he was learning to walk on his own 2 feet again, Sophia was beginning to understand, too late, the weight of the choices she had made. The man she had gotten involved with seemed distant now. The spell had faded. What had seemed liberating turned out to be shallow, ephemeral. And when she tried to go back, she found a wall. David was no longer there to welcome her, not even to listen to her. And it was in his silence that she understood, day after day, the extent of the loss she had caused. But there was something she still didn't know. Something he had discovered by chance, but that would forever change the way he saw the whole story. And this secret, still kept, was what made everything even more irreversible. Because betrayal, in itself, was already a mortal blow. But what would come next, that would be the true end. Time had passed, but inside her it seemed as if everything had stopped at the exact moment David got up from that table and left. Sophia tried to move on with her life, tried to follow her routine, but nothing in her could ignore the emptiness that spread with his silence. The days dragged on, the nights were too long, and his absence was a ghost that haunted every corner of the house, every fold in the sheet where he slept, every cup on the shelf. She tried to cling to her work, but the brilliance of the projects was no longer enough. She talked to her parents as if she were fulfilling a role, avoiding their gaze, avoiding the questions that always came with a tone of disappointment. Her father, more reserved, limited himself to observing her with an expression that said everything without saying anything. Her mother, more emotional, one night, after finding her crying in the hallway, asked softly, "Do you have any idea what you did to him?" Sophia didn't answer. She just closed her eyes tightly, as if she could erase the guilt that was eating away at her. David, on the other hand, seemed more distant than ever. He had changed his number, cut off all ties, blocked her on social media, and changed the lock on the house where they lived. Sophia learned from third parties that he had rented a small apartment, further away, where he spent his days in silence, reorganizing his own existence. That destroyed her. More than knowing that he had not forgiven her, it hurt to realize that she had ceased to exist for him. And yet, she persisted. She sent letters, asked to talk, left messages with mutual friends. Until one day, she received a reply. Short. To the point. A single sentence written on white paper, "Let's meet tomorrow, at 7 p.m., at the cafe near the square." The same place where they had their first date. Sophia's heart raced. She could barely sleep that night. The following afternoon, she spent hours in front of the mirror. She chose a discreet but beautiful dress, the same one she had worn on their second wedding anniversary. She wanted him to see in her traces of the woman he had once fallen in love with. She arrived early and sat by the window. Every minute seemed like an eternity. When he walked in, her entire body reacted. Not because of surprise, but because of the brutality of seeing him again. David was different. His facial features were more marked, his eyes less sweet. There was no bitterness, but there was firmness, a hardness she had never seen before. He sat down without saying anything. He just looked at her. For a few seconds, they were silent. And then he spoke. There was no rancor in his voice, but there was pain. A pain so thick that it made the air around him heavy. He began by asking her what she expected from that meeting. Sophia hesitated, then said she wanted to apologize, that she wanted to tell him she still loved him, that it had all been a mistake, a detour, a moment of weakness. He listened. He didn't interrupt. But his gaze didn't soften. When she finished, he just murmured, "You destroyed something that will never exist again." Sophia swallowed hard. She tried to argue, to say that things could be rebuilt. That was when he cut her off. He said he needed to tell her something. Something he had kept silent since the day it all happened. She looked at him, surprised. She thought there was nothing more to say. But there was. David said that the day after dinner, when he returned home just to pick up some documents, he found her parents sitting in the living room. They were worried, disconcerted. They had called him without knowing that the number had changed. They had noticed the change in Sophia for months, but they didn't know why. They asked to talk. And it was there, that afternoon, that Sophia's father revealed something that she had never had the courage to tell anyone. She and her boss had been exchanging messages, meetings, touching, and confessions for months. But what she hid, even from herself, was how much she had involved her own family in that process of denial. One day, weeks before the fateful dinner, her mother found her crying in her room. She asked if something had happened. And in an impulse that mixed guilt and despair, she poured out her heart. She told him everything. She said that she was confused, that she no longer knew what she felt, that she was emotionally involved with another man. Her mother was shocked, but she listened. She asked her to rethink, to talk to David, to not do anything rash. Her father was devastated. He never said a word about it after that day. But what David didn't know right away was that, while Sophia was going through her turmoil, her parents were also going through their own hell, trying to decide whether to tell him everything, trying to intercede for her without coming across as accomplices. But the real secret lay somewhere else. David said that when he talked to her father, he found out that it wasn't the first time. Years before, in the second year of their marriage, during a conference in another city, she had had a brief affair with a colleague. Something that, according to her, had no meaning. Her father found out because she told him, remorseful, swearing that it had been a weakness and that she would never do it again. At the time, he insisted that she confess to David. She promised that she would. But she never did. And she went on with her life as if nothing had happened. David found out there, sitting in the living room, listening to his father-in-law cry for his daughter and apologize for not intervening sooner. Sophia went pale. I couldn't breathe properly. She tried to deny it, but her voice failed. David continued. He said he no longer needed explanations. That he now understood that the betrayal of the present was just the reflection of a poorly buried truth. That he had been betrayed much earlier than he imagined. That everything he thought was solid was, in fact, sustained by silent lies. He said that the love he felt for her had died that day, in that conversation, but that he had chosen to keep the secret until he had the strength to face the truth head-on. Sophia tried to justify herself. She said she was young, immature, that she truly loved him, that she regretted it every day. You tried to hold his hand. He pulled away, calmly. He said he didn't feel hate. He felt pity. Because she hadn't just lost a husband. She had lost the only man who had truly loved her without reservations. And the cruelest part, she only realized it too late. He said he was with someone else now, that he didn't love her yet, but that he felt at peace, something he had never been able to feel with her after everything. Sophia was crying uncontrollably. She begged for one more chance, said she could change, that she would do anything. But he just stood up. Before he left, he looked at her one last time. He said that betrayal wasn't what destroyed love. It was the silence. The old lies. The conscious choice to hide the truth. He said that if she had told him in the past, maybe everything would have been different. But now, it was too late. And with one last look, he walked through the door of the cafe and disappeared down the sidewalk. Sophia stood there, alone, with her hands trembling and her gaze lost. For the first time, she understood what regret was. Not the immediate, superficial regret, but the kind that comes when you realize there is no going back. That certain choices cannot be corrected. And that when you lose the respect and trust of someone who loved you, there is no love that is enough. The emptiness she felt that night was not because of his absence, but because of the absence of herself, of the woman she had stopped being, of the person who had betrayed her own essence. But there was still more to come. Because some losses don't end with goodbye. Some just begin. Sophia left the cafe feeling her legs tremble, as if the ground had stopped supporting her. The city around her looked like a distant model, people crossed her path without realizing the abyss that had opened up inside her. The pain was intense, but what crushed her most was the knowledge that she had been the author of each crack. She walked the streets for hours, aimlessly, until the rain began to fall softly, without force, almost as a warning that the night would offer her no solace. Her dress clung to her body, her hair was disheveled, her wet face could not distinguish tears from rainwater. No one offered her shelter, and she did not ask for it. She arrived at her parents' house late at night, pushed the door open with her shoulders, and upon seeing her in that state, her mother simply wrapped her in a silent hug. There was no judgment. Only acceptance, and a sadness in her eyes that hurt more than any disapproval. Her father remained seated, with the newspaper closed on his lap, staring into space with empty eyes. They said nothing. And that said it all. In the following days, Sophia began to live in a state of emotional suspension. Work, which had once been her refuge, now hurt her. Every room, every face, every laugh reminded her of who she was no longer. The boss she had gotten involved with avoided direct contact, maintaining a cold, professional demeanor. There was no more exchange of glances, no more touching, there was nothing else. Just the embarrassing echo of something that started wrong and ended worse. He took no blame, nor any responsibility. And in silence, she began to understand how disposable she had been to him, how much she had deluded herself into thinking that this involvement was a reflection of something greater. It wasn't. It had been just another convenient fling, another distraction for a man who would never risk his own name for any woman. Sophia was forgotten as easily as she had been desired. But what aided her most was knowing that, while she was drowning in regrets, David was moving on with his life. The information was sparse but accurate. A mutual friend mentioned that he had started attending cultural events, something he had never done before. Another said that he was dating, but no one knew for sure who it was. Social media remained inactive, which only fueled the rumors and unanswered questions. Sophia tried not to think about it, but she failed every day. In her mind, David reappeared frequently, in 1,000 different versions, smiling at another woman, building new memories, starting over with someone who knew nothing about his pain. She hated this imaginary woman. But she hated even more the version of herself that allowed all this to happen. It was on a gray Tuesday that she decided to write one last letter. It wasn't just another request for him to return. It was a real request for forgiveness. She wrote calmly, bluntly, trying not to gloss over her mistakes. She told him about her loneliness, about the days when she couldn't get out of bed, about her recurring nightmares. But she also thanked him. She said that he had been the best man that had ever come into her life. That, despite everything that had happened, she would never forget him. She ended by saying that she didn't expect a reply, but that she needed to record how sorry she was for not having been the woman he deserved. She folded the paper carefully, put it in a plain white envelope, and left it in the mailbox of the old house where they had lived. She didn't know if he still passed by there, if he still picked up late mail, but she had to believe that at some point he would read those words. 2 weeks later, the unexpected happened. Sophia received a call from an unknown number. It was him. His voice was calm, but different. There was a layer of distance she had never heard before. He asked if they could meet. Her heart raced. She arranged to meet at the same place as before, but now in the late afternoon, with the sun already disappearing behind the buildings. When he arrived, he had someone with him. A young woman with gentle features and a discreet smile greeted Sophia politely. David simply said he would stop by for a few minutes before heading to another appointment. Sophia didn't know if that was cruel or just honest. They sat side by side, but this time there was no coffee, no table set. Just a park bench and the distant sound of children playing in the distance. David took an envelope out of his pocket. It was her letter. He said he had read it carefully and that it had made him reflect. He said he no longer felt angry, that he had learned to deal with the pain, but that he could not pretend that nothing had happened. He said that forgiving was not the same as forgetting. And that, although he had rebuilt himself, some scars would remain with him forever. But then he said something that Sophia did not expect. He said that the new woman in his life was someone who had always been there, but who he had never seen in that way. An old mutual friend, someone who had known them both since college. She had gotten closer by chance, after finding out what had happened. He was someone who never interfered, never judged, he was just there. And in the silence of that presence, he found the peace that Sophia, with all her intensity, had never been able to offer. Sophia listened to everything without interrupting. Each word was like a needle, but she knew she deserved to hear it. When he finished, she took a deep breath. She said she was happy for him, even if it cost her everything inside. She said she hoped that woman would offer him exactly what she, Sophia, had destroyed. And that if he ever needed anything, even if it was just silence, she would be there. David nodded, stood up, and before leaving, he looked at her with steady, calm eyes. He said that life is not about what people do to us, but about what we do with what they leave us. And that, despite everything, she had left him the ability to love again, even if that love was now for someone else. And then he walked away. Without resentment. Without regrets. Just with the certainty that he had closed a cycle. The woman who was with him approached, took his hand naturally, and together they disappeared down the sidewalk as the sky darkened. Sophia stayed there for a while longer. She didn't cry. For the first time in a long time, she was at peace with her own suffering. She understood, at that moment, that some losses are not punishments, but opportunities. She had lost the love of her life, yes. But perhaps, now, she could start to find herself again. And in the end, perhaps that was what she needed most. Because to truly love someone, she first had to learn to forgive herself. And that would be her new journey. One that she would have to walk alone. But before he got up, before he went on, he looked at the bench where they sat and slowly ran his hand over the cold wood. He closed his eyes. And for the first time, he felt like he could let him go. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. Because love, when it's true, doesn't hold you back. It sets you free. Even if, in the end, it's just to teach you to never love wrong again. The days that followed the meeting in that square came like a silent wave, which seemed to slowly move away from the sand after having left everything in ruins. Sophia no longer cried as often, but not because the pain had disappeared. It was as if the pain had learned to hide in places where she didn't notice it so much, in the automatic gestures of everyday life, in the details that had previously gone unnoticed, in the pauses between trivial conversations with her parents, in the solitary walks on the balcony. She was now more aware of what she had lost, but also of what she needed to rebuild, even without knowing where to start. The idea of winning David back had been, for weeks, her desperate motivation, her blind obsession, and now that that goal was out of reach, the silence once again felt like a hole opened in the center of her chest. It wasn't just his absence that hurt, it was the constant reminder of the woman she had become and that, deep down, she never wanted to be. Life seemed to follow strange, repetitive cycles, but Sophia struggled to see some lesson, some kind of direction in them. Classes resumed, projects resumed, but she was no longer the same confident coordinator or passionate teacher she used to be. Now, every story I read with the students felt more personal. The betrayed or repentant characters seemed close to her, almost like reflections of what she was experiencing inside. Literature, which had previously been a source of inspiration, became a mirror, and she saw herself reflected in the words of authors who narrated moral declines and crooked reconstructions. There were days when she had to leave the classroom and take a deep breath in the hallway, as if she were carrying the weight of all the pages she had read. But she didn't give up. She kept going, kept showing up, even though inside she was still patching up her own pieces. Now David, far from that world that had hurt him so much, seemed to have found a new rhythm. The woman he was with was different in every way. She didn't care about standing out, she didn't demand admiration, but her presence was light, calm, silent, like a discreet shelter in the middle of a storm. She didn't want to fix him, she didn't want to prove anything, she just offered company, listening and respect. David was still far from feeling completely restored, but he was beginning to experience sensations he had forgotten, the peace of a conversation without tension, the lightness of a shared silence, the trust that is built slowly, without haste, without secrets. It was strange, sometimes, to realize that he could laugh again, that he could make simple plans for the weekend without feeling that suffocating weight he had carried for so long. Little by little, he began to allow himself to believe that perhaps it was possible to love in another way, not with the excessive intensity of before, but with the wisdom that comes from pain. Meanwhile, Sophia began to rethink all her past relationships, all the choices she had made, all the times she had avoided difficult conversations or pretended certain feelings didn't exist. She began writing in an old notebook she had found in a drawer in her room. At first, they were just random sentences, then memories and reflections came to her, until without realizing it, she was writing letters to herself, letters that began with, "I forgive myself for," and ended with, "but I still don't know how to fix it." It was a painful but necessary exercise. She discovered that, more than David's forgiveness, she needed to learn to deal with her own contempt, with the feeling of having betrayed not only a love, but her very essence. There was no going back, but there was a road ahead. And no matter how foggy it was, it could still be followed. The relationship with her parents also underwent profound changes. Her father's silence, which had been suffocating, was now closer. He had understood that his daughter needed space, but not distance. Little by little, they started talking again, with pauses, with stumbles, but with sincerity. Her mother, always more sensitive, became her safe haven, although she carried in her eyes the wish that everything had been different. During dinner, after a quiet afternoon, her father said quietly, almost as if talking to himself, that sometimes the most serious mistakes are not the ones we make with others, but the ones we allow ourselves to make. Sophia understood immediately. And she cried. She cried not because of the loss, but because she finally understood that there was something deeper than the mistake she had made, there was the courage to face it, to try to be better, even if it was too late to make amends. David, on the other hand, visited the old places with different eyes. He passed by that square often now, but without pain. Sometimes he sat on the same bench where they had last spoken, but next to someone who brought lightness to his world. His new partner didn't ask him questions about the past, she just listened when he needed to vent, and that made all the difference. He had never told her all the details, he didn't need to. She understood that certain traumas are not to be explained, but respected. And for the first time in a long time, he felt that he didn't need to prove anything, nor be perfect, nor carry the burden of a solitary reconstruction. He began to glimpse a possible life, made of small joys and conscious choices. However, a dilemma began to form within him. It was no longer about Sophia, but about the very concept of forgiveness. Now that he was at peace, did it still make sense to keep the barriers erected so rigidly? Was it fair to deny her any kind of closeness, even if it was just friendship? Or would it be naive to believe that someone capable of destroying everything once could be reconfigured in another role, in another function? He didn't know. And this questioning accompanied him in the early hours of the morning, when everything was too quiet and the ghosts came to visit. He still dreamed about her, not about the present, but about the past. About what had been. About the promises made, about the sincere moments. These dreams didn't come as pain, but as memories. And that was confusing. Because the fact that he had overcome it didn't mean that he had forgotten. And forgetting, perhaps, was impossible. Sophia, for her part, no longer expected reconciliation. But sometimes she found herself imagining what it would be like if one day they could talk like two normal people, free from the burden of the past. She wanted to be able to show him that she had changed, not to convince him of anything, but to somehow honor the pain he had carried for so long because of her. She wanted, perhaps, to just be able to listen to him talk about his new life without feeling envy or guilt, only gratitude that he had managed to move on. But she didn't know if that would be possible. Because the love that had destroyed him was so real that any attempt to get closer now could feel like an invasion. Still, she wanted him to know that, silently, she was rooting for him every day. There was something else Sophia didn't tell anyone: she had started attending a support group. It wasn't about betrayal, but about starting over. There, she met people with devastating stories, some much worse than her own. She discovered that suffering didn't make her special, but it connected her with other souls in search of redemption. At one of these meetings, she heard a phrase that had a profound impact on her: "You are not what you did. You are what you choose to do next." That stayed in her mind for weeks. And that's when she began to think that perhaps her life still had some value to the world, even without David, even without love. She started to get involved in social projects, volunteered as a teacher in a needy community, and went back to writing literary texts, short stories in which characters dealt with regrets and tried to rebuild their stories. It was her way of transforming pain into art, guilt into service, loss into meaning. Davi continued to build his path with serenity. He took his new relationship calmly, without demands, without rushing. He was starting to allow himself to make plans again. He was thinking about moving to a new apartment, adopting a puppy, maybe even traveling to a distant place he had always dreamed of visiting. His friends said he was different, more mature, more introspective, but with a peace that had previously seemed impossible. And he knew why. He had weathered the storm and was now walking with his feet firmly on the sand, even though the sea was still roaring in the background. The story between them had not ended with just words spoken on a park bench. It still reverberated in gestures, in choices, in moral dilemmas that unfolded every day. The doubt about forgiveness, the search for meaning, the reconstruction of identity. Neither of them was the same anymore. And this, as painful as it was also a form of liberation. Fate had separated them, yes, but it had also transformed them. And this transformation, slow and silent, was perhaps the true redemption. But there was still something to come. Something that, although neither of them expected it, would place them once again at a crossroads. A choice that would test not love, but humanity. And in this new outcome, life would show, in a subtle and powerful way, that what truly defines someone is not how they love, but how they learn to move on when love ends. Autumn had arrived, and with it the cold mornings that enveloped the windows in fog and the sky in pastel tones. Sophia spent more time watching the leaves fall than actually living the days. It seemed that everything around her was telling her that cycles had ended, that some things simply would not come back, even if she wished them with all her might. The pain was no longer as acute, but there were still times when it would surprise her out of nowhere, like a sharp reminder of everything that had been lost. On one of those silent mornings, while organizing old books for donation, she found a small wooden box that she had not seen in years. Inside were old letters, travel tickets, candid photographs, scribbles on the edges of papers that had once been part of her and David's story. One note in particular made her catch her breath. It was handwritten: "The most beautiful part of loving you is knowing that I don't have to be someone else to deserve your love." She touched the letters with trembling fingers and felt a lump rise in her throat. At that moment, she felt like calling him, not to ask him anything, but just to tell him that she now understood every sentence like never before. Meanwhile, David was going through a silent transition in his own life. His current relationship, although stable and respectful, did not completely fill the gaps left by his previous one. Not for lack of affection, but for awareness. He knew he had learned to love differently, more cautiously, more rationally. It was a love that walked hand in hand with maturity and serenity, but that sometimes lacked that impulsive and imperfect spark that marked his time with Sophia. And this absence, even though it did not stop him from moving on, made him reflect frequently on how love is not a repetition of formulas, but the sum of the scars we accept to carry in order to start over. One afternoon, sitting in a park with his new partner, she surprised him by asking, "Do you still think about her?" He was silent for a few seconds before answering, "I do, but not with longing. I do because she is still part of the person I have become." She simply nodded, without jealousy, without pressure. That was why he stayed. She understood. Sophia, at the same time, began giving lectures in public schools about choices and consequences, about emotional ethics and emotional responsibility. She used literature as a basis, but between the lines she embedded everything she had learned about wounds that cannot be healed with pretty words. During one of these lectures, a student stood up and asked, "Teacher, if we make a big mistake, does life always give us another chance?" The question hit her hard. She took a deep breath and replied, "Life doesn't guarantee another chance. But it guarantees you the chance to become someone who deserves one. And that, sometimes, is already a lot." After that speech, the entire school fell silent. Many did not know what she had experienced, but everyone felt that this woman spoke with the weight of someone who had weathered storms. One day, Sophia received an unexpected invitation. It was from a mutual friend of hers and David's, someone who had not taken sides in the separation but who had always maintained respect for both of them. He invited her to a charity event, a book and reading fair at a community center where Sophia had worked years before. He said that David would also be there, as his new partner had been invited to moderate a discussion group about starting over. Sophia hesitated for days, pondered the wisdom of going, thought about everything that could arise from this reunion, until she finally decided. She wasn't going for him. She was going for you. She would no longer shy away from shared spaces, from overlapping memories, from possible conversations. She dressed simply and arrived early. He greeted the organizers, but avoided looking for him. When she saw him in the distance, next to his new partner, she felt a brief knot in her stomach, but she didn't look away. During the event, there was a time reserved for open speeches. People came up on stage to briefly tell stories of overcoming and learning. Sophia hadn't planned to speak, but something inside her was pulsing. She walked up to the microphone and, without a script, just with her soul in her hands, said, "My name is Sophia. A while ago, I lost someone who loved me deeply. And I lost it because I betrayed that person's trust. I thought I could hide it, justify it, rebuild it. But I understood that some breaks cannot be undone. Even so, I keep trying to become someone that person would be proud to have known. And even though she is no longer in my life, she still teaches me every day. Because love, even when it ends, can still teach." When she stepped off the stage, she didn't look at anyone. But she felt, inside, a lightness that she hadn't felt in years. Later, as she sat waiting for her ride on a concrete bench next to the parking lot, she heard his footsteps approaching. She didn't get up. He sat next to her, silent. They sat there for minutes without saying anything. He spoke first, without looking directly at her. "That line on stage, you know it hit me, right?" She laughed softly. She said she didn't know if he would be there, but that she had to say it. He continued, "I didn't know it still hurt to hear." She looked at him calmly and said, "It wasn't supposed to hurt. It was supposed to free me." He nodded and said, "You know I'm okay now. That I'm moving on." And she said, "Yes. And I'm really happy. You deserve it." There was a pause. Then he asked, "Are you okay?" She hesitated, then said, "I'm trying. Some days are easier than others. But I think I'm finally at peace with everything." He smiled. "That's a lot." Shortly after, his partner approached. Sophia greeted her with a slight wave and a sincere smile. The woman returned it. There was a strange but beautiful maturity in that moment. No tension, no rivalry, no resentment. Just three people who, in different ways, learned that love and time do not always go together, but that respect can be a bond even after the end. As they said goodbye, David held her gaze for a few seconds and said, "Thank you for having the courage." She replied, "Thank you for listening to me." And then he left. Sophia returned home that night with a peaceful heart. Not because she had resolved everything, but because she had accepted that not everything can be resolved. There was a profound value in being able to exist in the same story as someone who had loved and lost someone, without getting hurt, without wanting to erase the past. She began writing a new story that morning, inspired by characters who forgave each other without having to go back to being who they were. A story where the endings were not necessarily happy, but true. She felt that she was ready for something new, even without knowing what it was. She didn't want to replace anyone, she didn't want to fix the past. She just wanted to move on. Because I finally understood that moving on is not about forgetting what happened, but about letting go of the burden of trying to rewrite what cannot be changed. But fate, as always, still had one last piece in store. A piece that would not change history, but would definitively seal the roles that each one came to occupy in the other's life. And this piece would not come as pain or surprise, but as confirmation that, no matter how many lives take different paths, some bonds remain in the invisible, like watermarks on the paper of memory. And when it appeared, it would make it clear that true redemption is not about re-establishing what was broken, but honoring with dignity that which, even broken, still formed us. Months passed since that reunion at the charity event, and over time, the scars left by the betrayal did not disappear, but settled in like parts of a story that no longer hurt as much as before. Sophia, increasingly involved in her education and writing projects, found unexpected strength in the routine she had built with so much effort. Her texts began to attract attention, and little by little, invitations for publications and interviews began to appear. She never directly exposed what she had experienced, but the truth pulsed between the lines of each story, in each character who struggled with their own past. She became a silent reference for other women who had also made mistakes and were looking to start over. But despite everything she had achieved professionally, a part of Sophia remained silent, the part that knew she would never again experience a love as pure as the one she had destroyed. That was no longer an open wound, it was an absence that she had learned to respect. She no longer tried to fill that space. She accepted it as one accepts an old photograph that cannot be erased, but also does not want to forget. David was still steadfast in his new journey. His current relationship, although discreet, was solid. The woman by his side made him feel whole, but in a different way. There was no longer the urgency of passion, there was serenity. He was grateful for that. He felt that, after everything, he had become a more conscious man, less impulsive, someone who knew the importance of recognizing his own emotional limits. He never mentioned Sophia's name in his conversations again, not out of bitterness, but out of respect. With her, he learned how much love requires courage, but also how forgiving requires an even greater kind of strength, the strength to let go without wanting anything back. One morning, he woke up next to his partner and, watching her sleep, he thought he had finally found peace, not the peace of perfection, but the peace of someone who knows he made the right choice in not going back to what hurt him, even though he still feels a certain fondness for the memories. Life, as always, went on with its cruel naturalness. Sophia received news she had not expected. Her father had a silent heart attack and did not survive. It was a hard blow. He had been, in recent times, her point of balance, her reference of integrity and compassionate silence. At the funeral, when she looked at her father's face for the last time, she felt she needed to do something about that pain. Months later, she released a book dedicated to him, a novel that told the story of a woman who betrayed her own destiny and had to learn to rebuild it from the rubble. The book was a modest but true success, and reached readers who recognized themselves in its pages. David read that book. Someone recommended it to him without knowing the connection between them. When he reached the end and saw the dedication, his father's name, the weight of the words, he understood everything. He cried. Not because of the pain that still lingered, but because of the beauty of knowing that that woman, even hurt by her own mistakes, had chosen to use her story to try to do good. And for the first time, he felt proud of her. Sophia lived alone for a long time. Not because there were no opportunities, but because no connection seemed real. This did not come from arrogance or self-imposed punishment, but from the awareness that I no longer wanted half-hearted love, nor relationships that began on empty ground. One day, after a lecture, a man approached me and complimented my writing. The conversation was simple but honest. He was a widower, had a small daughter, and a vision of the world that impressed Sophia with its clarity and calm. They began to see each other frequently, without expectations, just sharing their daily lives. And over time, something blossomed there, carefully and unhurriedly. A more mature, more serene type of affection. When she realized she was in love again, Sophia cried. She cried not because of the novelty, but because she was shocked that she was still capable. She knew she would not be the same as Davi, but she also knew she did not have to be. It was a different time, a different love, and she was already a different woman. David, on a Sunday night, received an unexpected call. It was the same mutual friend who had reconnected them at the event. He said he was organizing a new educational campaign in partnership with a publisher, and wanted to invite David and his partner to participate alongside Sophia. It was a project aimed at at-risk youth, focusing on literature and emotional ethics. David hesitated. His partner wisely said, "You know this story was never about hurt feelings. Go." And he did. When they arrived at the meeting place, David and Sophia's eyes met for a few seconds. There was a discreet, knowing smile, without tension. During the presentation, they talked about choices, about limits, about the importance of truth. When they finished, the audience gave a standing ovation. A teenager raised his hand and asked, "Have you two ever been hurt a lot?" Sophia answered firmly, "Yes. But what matters is what we do with the scars." David looked at her, and for the first time, he saw only peace. At the end of the event, outside, the two chatted briefly. David talked about his current life, about how he finally felt light. Sophia talked about the man she had met, about his daughter, about how she was rediscovering hope. When they said goodbye, they hugged for the first time in years. A calm, genuine hug, where neither of them wanted anything more than that moment of peace. When they walked away, David said, "Thank you for choosing to change." Sophia replied, "And thank you for not coming back." They smiled, and then each went their separate ways. They never saw each other again after that. But somewhere in their souls, they both knew that their stories were sealed forever. Not because their love ended, but because of the transformation they caused in each other. Sophia learned that love needs to be cared for, because when it breaks, it can never be the same again. David learned that forgiving doesn't mean moving on, but moving on without carrying the weight of bitterness. They both did. And in doing so, they showed that even the most painful stories can bear fruit, if they are faced with courage and dignity. Now we want to know, what did you think of this story? Leave your honest opinion in the comments, we really want to know how this narrative touched you. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take advantage of this moment and subscribe now. Here, every week, you will hear real, intense stories that show how much decisions in love shape our destiny. And never forget, cheating doesn't just destroy a relationship. It destroys trust, dignity, dreams, and often, what could have been the love of your life. Cheating isn't just a mistake. It's a choice. And every choice has consequences. This channel does not support any kind of betrayal in any way. Here, our goal is to show how regret comes too late, and how true love must be protected with truth, respect, and loyalty. Until the next story.